My The meeting is being recorded, and my name is Karim El-Bayar. As many of you may already know, I am the new program coordinator for the Connecting Business Initiative, and I'll be taking over for Karen Smith, but we'll be working very closely with her and the rest of the CBI team to ensure a hopefully seamless transition. I'm really looking forward to building on the successes from the first 5 years of CBI to strengthen our existing networks and begin to expand and scale to new countries and to provide new service offerings like this work stream on innovation and new technologies for private sector disaster management. We have a really interesting presentation today, so I'm going to be as brief as possible at the beginning so that we can have more time for discussion. As many of you know, today is the second webinar organized by our colleagues at the SDG AI Lab for CBI member networks. The SDG AI Lab is an initiative organized by the UN Development Program, and it's dedicated to supporting the achievement of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, by harnessing the potential of artificial intelligence, or AI, machine learning, and other technology. We've asked the SDG AI Lab to research new technologies and their potential uses in humanitarian emergencies by the private sector. Today, we're going to hear an update from this team on the progress of their research, and they're going to ask you to tell them which areas we should be focused on going forward. So we do look forward to a lot of interactivity and discussion today, and as you'll see, we've reserved about half of the session for a Q&A and an interactive discussion. Before we get to all of that, let me now introduce Gökhan Dikmener, the technical specialist for UNDP's Istanbul International Center for Private Sector and Development. He's going to say a few additional words of introduction, and then we'll continue with the rest of our presentation. So Gökhan, over to you.
Good morning and good afternoon. And I would like to thank you for your participation. It's a pleasure to be here with the CBI networks. And this partnership is particularly important for us because it is a very timely initiative. And at the same time, it is very important. And we highly value this partnership. And now you will see a series of interesting presentations from my colleagues from SDG AI Lab about disaster risk management. And before moving into these presentations, I would like to highlight that at certain points, you may find the technology interesting and you may feel like you will need some additional technical capacity or support about implementing these ideas. This is where SDG AI Lab comes to pictures, and we will be ready to support you and your stakeholders in exploring these ideas, in implementing these ideas, together with the CBI Global Secretariat. Thank you, and over to my colleagues. I wish you a successful and entertaining presentation. Thank you.
Well, thanks again, Gökhan, for that. We'll now be hearing from Jonas Nathnagel, Martin Sizietti, and Ken Young from the SDG AI Lab. And I'm sure that I have destroyed all of their names, and I apologize to all three of you, but you can correct us. And as I mentioned at the outset, there will be an opportunity later for questions and answers. We'll ask you to raise your hands using the buttons in the chat function. You can see that in Zoom if you want to speak, and we'll ask you to sort of unmute yourselves. We'll call on you. I know we have representatives from our networks in Vanuatu, Sri Lanka, Fiji, and Indonesia in the room with us today. So thank you again. Really looking forward to your input. And please do feel free to use the chat to introduce yourselves or ask questions during the presentations. Jonas, over to you.
Thank you so much, Karim, and thank you, Gökhan. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jonas, and it's nice talking to you guys again, or if it's the first time, it's nice to meet you electronically. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research today. I don't have much time doing so, so I'm trying to be really focused. And if I talk too fast, please just type your questions in the chat. But before diving in, I think I want to emphasize one or 2 points, and I also did that yesterday in the first webinar. So I'm working on this topic since almost a year now, and I also work as a data scientist professionally. And I think I really need to acknowledge that it's a very complicated and multi-layered thematic we're talking about. So trying to acknowledge this, we're really trying to be as practical as possible and focusing on the things that can bring immediate contribution to the networks. And in line with this, I want to encourage 3 things. First of all, please check the report that's going to come out soon, because everything I'm going to talk about is going to be explained in much more details there. So it's easier to understand, I think. Second of all, please engage with us, ask any questions you want. So we're gonna have a nice discussion afterwards. And the third point is, and most importantly, I really encourage you to reach out to us afterwards so we can have a little bit more focused discussions and see how we can guide you and focus a little bit more on individual needs of the networks. Okay, so let's jump in. I think I have control. All right, so I want to start to give a little throwback to the first webinar we had. And last time we asked you what technologies you're already using in your work. And as you can see, there are some technologies which are more relevant than others. For example, social media, GIS systems, cloud computing, communication networks. So surprisingly and interestingly, when I did my research, I tried to kind of classify technologies and I tried to rank them for immediate opportunities, next year opportunities, and upcoming opportunities. So maybe things have high potential, but it will take some time until they can unfold it. And all the technologies you mentioned last time are also part of the immediate opportunities actually. And those are AI, machine learning, crowdsourcing, cloud computing, GIS, social media, and communication networks, including mobile phones and 5G. So I just want to show you how we derived at this classification. And there were 5 things I was looking at. First, it's the prevalence, just basically looking how many successful use cases we already have of this technology. Then maturity, is it still a prototype or is it already, well, easy to use and we can basically like use it as an industry almost. Then simplicity, like how difficult and complex it is to use it, the potential, like how much impact it can have on disaster management, and affordability. Is it cheap or is it more expensive to use? So those are the things that scored the best. And if you want more information, we can talk about them later a little bit. But the only thing I want to mention now before diving into the more private sector related role is to answer the question, what are the major use cases those technology are used for? And this wasn't too easy because there isn't like a clear methodology out there. So what I try to do is I really try to group them and cluster them together as much as possible. And I want to give you a brief definition of all of them. I kind of came up by myself. So yeah, let's get started with the first 3 ones, which are also the most important one in my opinion. So the first one is situational awareness, actionable information gathering. This basically involves getting a good overview of what is going on in a disaster, putting it in simple terms. For example, through a dashboard. Then we have damage and loss assessments, assessing damages and basically finding what people and what places need the most resources in a disaster. Then disaster assessment, basically predicting the likelihood that a disaster will happen, or an early warning system disseminating those warnings. Then disaster relief logistics, resource allocation, trying to find the best way to efficiently allocate resources in a disaster. And there we have a nice example from the Vanuatu network actually with the blockchain. So maybe we can also talk about that a little bit in the end. Emergency communication is related how we communicate a disaster to people. This was very important in the COVID-19 pandemic right now. And there's a nice example from the Mexico network with the COVID-19 dashboard. I'm not sure if they're in this call right now, probably not because of the time zone. Then we have event simulations, which aren't too prevalent in my opinion. And this is more concerned with, for example, using technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality to give trainings to people so they learn how to behave in a disaster. Then search and rescue is basically 2 things. First of all, locating people, and second of all, rescuing them. This is very experimental. For example, we can do this by using robotics, but I think this is like a next year opportunity and upcoming thing. And then disaster detection, which, for example, involve things like detecting the aftermath of earthquakes. Okay, so a lot of information, and I don't want to spend so much time talking about the research because everything is in the report and you can find it there. One thing I want to talk about today a little bit more is the role of the private sector in the whole picture. So let me go to the next slide. One back. Okay, so before diving in, I think I want to say that, of course, it would make more sense to have this conversation about each network individually because countries differ, the member companies differ, the disaster differ, the available resources differ. But there are some things which are kind of true throughout all the networks, and those are the things I want to talk about today. And first of all, I think it is important to understand that we can have this win-win situation. So why should the private sector even engage in disaster management? Okay, this is a little bit unlucky. Let me go back. All right. So there are 2 sides of the same medal. First of all, what can the private sector give? why is it important that they contribute for technology-driven disaster management, and then what they can gain. So first of all, it's important to understand that most know-how, innovation, existing solutions, data, especially access to high quality data, is coming from the private sector. And it's not only big multinational companies like Facebook and Twitter that have access to data and create solutions. It's also small companies, local companies that maybe have access to specific parts of the population and access to specific data we can leverage. Then also, of course, the private sector can be a role model and they have good outreach to population, sometimes even better than the public sector has in some countries. And while including technologies in their work, we also increase the local ownership. So it's gonna be like the cycle of resilience in the country. I think this is also the most important point, what the private sector can gain, and that's the increased resilience. Working for technologies and disaster management will lead to more resilience in the communities and the countries, and this is good for healthy business, of course. And there are some practical considerations like increased skill for the staff, spillover effects, and we look for innovation. It's going to also be effective for other parts of the business, maybe better branding and very important partnerships. And partnerships is really, really what we need to drive this forward. And we're going to talk about this as well in a second. Okay. So after we have a little better understanding why this can be a win-win situation for everyone, let's outline some of the common challenges we need to overcome. And I think the most important one is definitely limited resources when we look at our network countries. And this includes limited funding, limited technical know-how, or maybe a lack of existing infrastructure in the country to even apply some technologies. So tackling this is a little bit challenging, and I think the best way forward here are partnerships with academia, the public sector, and other big international organizations. Something else which is really important, I think, is the uncertainty about digital maturity. And this includes that we really need to know what each member company network can bring to the table. We need to understand what are the available resources, what are the existing data sources, and what are the needs. So we need to identify the need and shape the understanding. So this is why we have those webinar sessions. Then data, and this is something we could probably talk 1 hour about. We need high quality data and we need access to real-time data. And time is a very important dimension when we talk about disaster management. And it was also subject of the discussion after the webinar yesterday that, well, having access to good data is very difficult. And fortunately, Karim had some nice remarks about that. And I think, again, there are some technologies that can help overcoming this. For example, crowdsourcing. We can talk about this a little bit more later. But again, partnerships. Partnerships are very important here. Other things we need to keep in mind are legal issues that we need to follow, of course, the humanitarian standards when we process data, and that we need to shape the acceptance and awareness in the population so we can apply those technologies. All right. So I don't want to spend too much time here, and I want to outline some very practical considerations that are, I think, more important for our context. And I think the best way to do this is to look at the next and my last slide. So this looks a little bit complicated maybe, but this is kind of a high-level overview of all the network countries, some major risks they're facing, and some technologies that are very promising for them according to my research and what I think is going to be helpful. So going back to the practical considerations, generally, I think we really need to understand that every high-tech solution, and it does not really matter how advanced it is, will fail if it does not reach the people in need. And if you do research, you read about a lot of very complicated and complex technologies, and they are indeed very promising, but they also require a lot of resources, existing infrastructure and know-how. So you really need to see what we can do that brings immediate contribution. So one thing, for example, which I can recommend for everyone, and now I think I need to watch the time a little bit, so I'm going to be a little bit more general with my recommendations, is, for example, crowdsourcing that can tackle the data collection. We can also do this by drones. So we can use the drones to collect the footage, but something like crowdsourcing is very helpful because it also engages the local population. So they have the need of being part of the solution, which they are indeed, and we can also collect data that we couldn't collect otherwise. And this is very helpful, especially in countries like Haiti and the Pacific, Fiji, Pacific, Vanuatu, also the Philippines, Indonesia, because data collection is not a very institutionalized thing here. So doing so can really help to advance in our response. And I think Martin is going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. Yeah. So I guess, do I still have some time left? For the sake of time, maybe I will just leave this a little bit open and I'm super happy to discuss a little bit more in detail how we can support each network with technologies. But maybe we're gonna move to the first Mentimeter so you can give me some feedback, and then we can go back to the slide later and can discuss. So thank you very much over from my side, and over to Karim.
Thank you, Jonas, and thank you for that great presentation. A lot of content there that was delivered very quickly, so we will get into that in more detail as we continue with the session today. I think most of you on this call are already familiar with Mentimeter, but if you aren't, please follow the directions that you see on the screen here. You can go to menti.com, and then you can enter in that code 30192568. And our first question is really, what kinds of use cases are most relevant for you in your country context or in your member network context? We'd really like to hear from you what we should be focusing on, and you can see the various categories there. I see about 27 people in the room, so we'll hold here until we get to at least half of the voting. So far, one respondent. We'll give it a second here. So just again, you can use your phone or your computer to go to menti.com and enter in that code.
I also understand
more votes are coming in.
that the definition was a little bit quick, maybe. So feel also free to ask again if you want to reassure if you understood it correctly.
And in fact, while people are voting, Jonas, not to put you on the spot, but do you want to give us a quick overview of the categories we see here?
Oh yeah, of course. So the first one is situation awareness. I think the font is a little bit small. Actionable information gathering, which I also deem as the most important one. And I think that's something I missed to say actually, so apologies for that. When I did the research, of course, I could only cover a subsample of all the things that are going on because a lot is covered in academia, in papers, and in some news articles. But I would say probably 80% of the use cases I was looking at least are coming from situational awareness, damage and loss assessment, and disaster assessment. So it's not too surprising to also see this resembled in the votes now. And we also have the relief logistic, maybe because we have the Vanuatu network with the blockchain and it's spreading a little bit to the other Pacific islands. So it's really interesting to see that actually taking the lead.
Well, thanks for the colleagues who have been entering in so far. So we have 7 votes, and it looks like the technology that is most relevant or interesting in your context so far is around disaster relief logistics and resource allocation. So that's certainly a place that we'll talk about. It's interesting. This is a slightly different distribution than we had
absolutely.
earlier today.
Absolutely.
For everybody else who's on the call, I mean, there's no wrong answers here. We're looking really for your feedback and your ideas. So please don't be shy and do enter into the Mentimeter. We have one more Mentimeter question. And again, if you're on your phone or your computer, you can go to menti.com and enter in that code 3012568. This is a free text. So if you enter in your response, it will pop up here on the screen and it would be helpful for us. We'd love to know how the research report that you've been hearing us discussing so far today and in the previous session can be more useful for the private sector in your country. And again, there's really no wrong answers. We'd just love to hear your opinions and thoughts. So please do enter something in if you can. And we'll hold here for a minute or two. Well, I know that there are 27 people in this room, so maybe it's a little bit too early or too late in the morning, depending on where you are. But we can revisit this question certainly in the interactive discussion in the Q&A. So why don't we go ahead and let Martin continue with the presentation so that we can take full advantage of that. And you know, definitely do think about these questions, folks. It's great to hear about the technologies that exist in the world, but we are really more interested in providing solutions that work in your context. So we do want to know from you what is most interesting for you. Martin, over to you.
Yes, hello. Is everything all right? Can you hear me?
You're coming through loud and clear.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, all right. It takes a second until the remote control works, but now I can see the buttons. And I'm trying to switch the slides.
Martin and Nara, if we're having trouble with the remote control, like last time, perhaps Nara can advance the slides if you just say next slide.
Okay, I will do that. So I will just start to talk now. Yeah, thank you very much for joining this webinar. And my name is Martin Sigeti. I'm currently working in Istanbul for SDG AI Lab, and we are collaborating with CBI in this research and prototype solution project. And my part is more about the prototype solution regarding GIS technologies. And yeah, we have to discuss this in a way that splits into two parts. So the first thing was that we tried to develop some sort of an idea of what can be practically done with the available data we were presented with. And so we came up with a prototype solution, some technical implementation of the things Jonas actually talked about in his presentation. So I will give you a short introduction of GIS in general, how it is relevant for disaster risk management, and also how the prototype solution and what we are doing here is relevant for the member networks. Okay, next slide, please. So to start off, let me explain very quickly what we mean when we talk about GIS. So a geographic information system, GIS, is a system designed to capture, store, manipulate, analyze, manage, present, and all types of geographical data. Next slide. And since GIS is a core technology in the development context, I would like to highlight 3 core activities research and policymakers try to conduct when using GIS. First thing is information extraction on the right bottom side is key for the success of any research activity. And let's take an earthquake as an example. Without knowing the severity and location of damages, rescue teams cannot locate the target's areas in an emergency operation. Second thing we do is predictive analytics. This is the scientific part of GIS where models can be created and used to predict future events. So talking about the example of earthquakes, models help to understand the vulnerability of people in affected areas better. So in this way, we can focus the preemptive measures on areas of higher risks. The third thing I want to mention is that GIS is just great because we can use it for mapping, and maps are one of the best visual tools to understand complex phenomena. Next slide. So if you talk about GIS as a technology in disaster risk management, there are some practical examples here and a list of bullet points, which Jonas also mentioned in some degree in his presentation. So we talk about this whole hazard risk, vulnerability, exposure nexus. Early warning systems can be designed and maintained. Damage assessments can be produced, and this whole framework of preparedness, response, and recovery is embedded into the GIS technologies. So disaster types, and some of them are really relevant for the member networks today, especially floods, droughts, earthquakes, and volcanoes and storms are natural disasters in this case, where GIS technology can help to alleviate and reduce the impact or predict in the future what is going on. And the image on the right side depicts like this kind of summary of what I talked to in the previous slides, and what Jonas was saying is that there's a certain way to collect data. This is the first step. Then we have to analyze the data, and then we can put it out into the world and make it usable with the GIS technology. So next slide. And this is a high-level example of by Google, and they developed a flood protection service, a prediction service, which uses machine learning, so high-level technology, to identify areas of land which are prone to flooding before and alerts users before the waters arrive. So there's a combination between telecommunication networking and also like systems to like really interactively predict this events and warn people. So this is really powerful, and up to 200 million people benefit from this right now in India. And I think they're piloting it in Bangladesh as well. Next slide. Yeah, so some of the major innovations, I want to be quick on this slide, even though it's a lot of information, you can look later. So we are moving like from the 1960s, from digital remote sensing, where the digital age basically started as a military operation, to like more advanced systems. And one trend we can see basically is that more and more applications which are GIS relevant came to the market, and first in the military way, but later for private use and public use as well, like positioning systems. but also web mapping services. Everybody knows Google Maps, and we will also talk later about this because I will use Google Maps as a data source for something relevant in the study. And crowdsourcing is something which is a trend, a general trend in the internet age. So people are requested to submit their own data into open databases, and I know that our partners also work with such databases like humdata.org and similar. And then now the technology is moving to a certain point where systems are more and more integrated. So we are kind of connecting everything, and every device kind of knows where it is in space and in time. So we will be able in the future to design like more smart cities and things like this. But this is a little bit complicated if you talk about the logistics of making this. Next slide. Yeah, so now it's a prototype, and the prototype we were talking about is like, why are we motivated to do a certain prototype? So first we identified the importance of MSMEs for the member networks, and you can see on the bottom there's this great quote from the MSME Day, also by CDI. So it contributes to like up to 90% of the firms contribute to 70% of the employment of member countries and 50% of the gross domestic product. It varies from country to country, but it's really a huge impact. And we saw opportunities to increase resilience for those businesses, and also wanted to design a multi-purpose tool and also make it in an online format. So next one. Yeah, so first thing we notice is that there's actually no data on MSMEs and their position. So there are like two images here. The left side is an earthquake report from Izmir. You can see some dots, but there are like some businesses located. And they wanted to identify the risks for each of these businesses and the severity of the earthquake damages. And on the right side, you can see an output of a report from the Philippines, and the amount of MSMEs are just clustered in like huge areas, so it's difficult to identify where the location is, exactly in which street or in which like neighborhood the damages are really big or the risks. Next slide. So what can help us to identify the location of these MSMEs? So first of all, we can obviously ask the country networks directly, but we can also collect data. And this is something I have seen that is really powerful in some way. So we use digital technology, Python scripts to extract data from crowdsourced data sources such as OpenStreetMap, where people ingest the information, and also from proprietary data sources like Google Maps, where companies submit data. And as you can see on the bottom examples, left side is collected data, restaurants and such in a city in the Philippines. And on the right side, as you can see, you can also go with Street View, and you can actually even validate what you see, and you can make sure that this is really existing. And as a third point, this is important, we can also collect, with Street View, we can collect the information about the building structure. So in this case, for example, you have a building which is not very resilient against earthquakes or floods because it's made out of like cheap materials, and it will be damaged a lot. Next slide. Yeah, so some of the possible outputs, what we can make with this data is that you can see this is some sort of a risk map, and we can this is a flood inundation depth map. So if you zoom into this location, I show you on the top side, you can see that the restaurant is a more red area. So it means that there's a deeper level of inundation of this possible event. And on the bottom, you can see that the land was a bit higher. For example, the food restaurant in this area is, for example, better protected against such floods. Next slide. So what can it actually give us? So the information we are talking about is like what type of MSME we can be identified, restaurant or similar, how many are in a location, what is the exact location, what is the disaster context of this location, and also with building type, we can actually assess the earthquake resilience, and we can build density clouds, clusters, and such mixed sticks. And we can use existing hazard maps or models to predict the certain dangers, but we also can use Climada, which is a model I'm working with. Next one. Last slide. So there are outcomes just in summary. So we can create an exposure database of MSMEs and critical infrastructure. We can also use additional layers on building resilience, which I said we can collect with Street View. We can embed it into interactive tools. It's not a report, static report. And so we are quantifying risks here. We are building models on vulnerability indices, risk exposure mapping, and it's pretty low on resource requirements. It is scalable, and I think we can replicate it in most countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin, and thanks to all of the colleagues who are with us and listening in on these presentations. I think if you do not object, we'll also have one more presentation from Ken now on natural language processing before we go into our interactive discussion. So Ken, over to you, please.
All right, thanks, Karim. Hello, everyone. My name is Ken, and I'm currently working on the NLP prototyping. Now, natural language processing is a key emerging tech that involves programming computers to process and analyze large amounts of human-readable natural language data, hence the term natural language processing. You can consider this as a crossover of multiple traditional fields like linguistics, computer science, and cognitive science. Through the deep dive workstream, the SDGI lab is creating a NLP prototype to demonstrate how this technology could further enhance our understanding of the private sector initiated disaster management. Through the next 2 slides, I will briefly introduce you the key objective of the workstream, the expected outcome, the development process, and the interim results. The advanced analytics with the NLP is a technology that can enhance strategic planning by highlighting growth opportunity that would otherwise be hard to spot. There has been a recent case of a company that specialized in certain chemical compound that scanned all the publicly available information on such compound to identify a new potential application. And of course, scanning all publicly available information cannot be done by a human alone. So in this similar context, the problem which has been identified by this workstream is that there is a lack of systematic way to gather information on private sector activities in regards to the disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. It is an important market, and CBI can benefit from understanding this better. Therefore, the key objective of this workstream has been set to create a data pipeline that extracts text information from CSR reports. The insights gained from this workstream would benefit the CBI Secretariat and its network to stay up to date in broad scope of activities in disaster management. Amongst the sorted informations, there could be lessons to be learned from practices by other private entities elsewhere. As an interim result, visualizations have been created. It is possible to view the data sets of CSR reports based on each sector as an example. Disaster management was commonly found amongst financial services, oil and gas producers, general industrial, chemicals, and constructions and material. Deeper investigations on how these companies might be referring to disaster would be required, as they could be the cases of a hazard for individual company as opposed to natural disaster. So along this information, it has been identified that companies, including MSMEs from Turkey, Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Mexico of the CBI network countries, had company reports with disaster reference. The prototype development in the upcoming months will be involved how to investigate this further in a more systematic way. The development process will proceed to find out how the companies are referring to this natural disaster keywords and what are their activities. So please stay tuned for the further updates in the upcoming months. I'd like to hand over the mic to Karim.
Thank you again, Ken, Jonas, and Martin for these presentations. I would like us now to go into the question and answer and discussion portion of our event today. So as I said before, we're really looking forward to hearing from all of you in the room, your feedback, your comments, your questions. So you can either unmute yourself and dive right in, or you can use the hand arrow to raise your hand and we will unmute you so that you can speak. So I think there is a question here from Andre R in the chat asking about whether we are working with any companies in Madagascar on drones. Do the colleagues from the SCG AI Lab want to respond to that one while we wait and give a moment for our other colleagues to come up with any questions or comments?
Yeah, I can answer this question because it's a bit GIS related. We are currently not directly working with drone data, and we always mention drones as an example for innovative technologies because, as you probably know, it came up in the recent years and it's improving. But we are looking forward to build partnerships with drone companies directly or companies who use drones to do science in the field and build prototypes, for example. Yeah, I hope this is sufficient.
Thank you, Martin. And maybe I'll sort of exercise my privilege here as the host to ask a question of my own. I know that we have in our room today our member networks from Vanuatu, Sri Lanka, Fiji, and Indonesia. So all states that are surrounded by water. Can you tell us a little bit about the technologies that we've heard presented today? What might be most applicable in the contexts that we know these member networks are dealing with? What technologies might they most profit from, in your opinions? Is it GIS and NLP, as we heard presentations on today, or is it something else?
If you like, this time I can start with some introductions and then my colleagues can join with their additional inputs. And for many countries, I guess the answer starts with a good assessment of their current status and a digital maturity assessment about where they are standing in this journey will be the crucial first step. And as you suggested, the nature of these countries, I guess, necessitates some capacities related to GIS, and also NLP is a low-hanging fruit. But before going into that direction, in relation to their digital maturity, they may use some of the technologies like cloud computing and some other similar basic technologies to prepare them for the more advanced ones. And I will leave floor now to my colleagues, Jonas and Martin, to give a little bit more detail about these technologies and how it can be relevant to the countries mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Gökhan. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I think we need to be realistic here. And I think, as you said, that everything starts with two things. First of all, identifying the need. So we need to focus on the what and not necessarily the how first, because it's also something I noticed from my work practice as a data scientist. When I started to work on those things, I was always thinking about, okay, how I'm going to solve this and this, what model can I use for doing so? But I think before thinking about the how, we should really think about the what. So identifying the need, for example, it could be, okay, what is our problem? We need to have a better understanding of where are the major damages after a disaster. So, and then we can think about what do we need for that. And then we come to the next point, and that is to really have a good understanding of the existing resources in the networks. And this comes with the digital maturity assessment. And unfortunately, and please correct me, everyone in this call, I don't think there's like an existing methodology to do that for the private sector realm. So I think this is actually a big lack, and that's something that we could tackle. So we have like really a step-by-step approach to assess what is there and what we can do with that. And if we know what we want to achieve, like what is our demand, and we also know what we already have, then we can understand what is the gap in between. And then we can think about, okay, how can we close this gap? And mostly the gap is going to be data. We have to be realistic here. Because also in my job, I spend 80% of the time not building models. I spend it collecting data, cleaning data. So I think the gap will mostly be data. And as Gökhan said, technologies that can help us bridging this gap are things like crowdsourcing or also machine learning and AI. And I think we had a good question yesterday about how to process text documents to extract actionable information. Also, I remember we had some discussions with the PDRF network in the Philippines about how we can extract information in real time automatically when a disaster happens. And things like that can be very helpful to automatize processes and to put in processing rules so we have clean data we can work with. So I think in this sense, technologies like crowdsourcing, of course, AI, machine learning are very, very helpful. And as you said, cloud computing, I was a little bit surprised to not read more about cloud computing. I think because it's not a very, let's say, buzzword technology, I'm not sure. But I think it's very promising also for a lot of the networks because it basically just requires access to internet. That's the only thing. And it takes away the need of owning physically a server and create computing power. So just with access to internet, we can have all those things on demand. So I think this is also a very, very promising field to work in. Yeah, so maybe somebody else wants to add something. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Maybe I can add something, if it's okay. So, I mean, just wanted to connect to what has been said before is that there are basically two interesting things I was thinking about is that what kind of technical solution are we interested in and how will it impact the people in the country? And like, is this some sort of like case study and we want to exercise the potential of a technology, for example, see that if a drone can actually enhance the rescue operations for a specific area, we can exercise this and probably see that, yes, it does. But what kind of benefit will this bring to a member network or to people in the field? Because we would have to scale this idea and we would have to implement thousands of drones or hundreds of drones in such a disaster event and have systems which enable us to automatically produce the results and actually use technology. So there are so many examples of like, okay, we can use this specific technology in this context, in this place, and there's a report or a scientific publication on this, but how can we actually bring it to everybody and really use it wide scale? I don't see so many examples where this has been done. Maybe the blockchain example in Vanuatu is one. And so for our prototype, the one I'm working on right now is the question is, of course, what kind of data can we use? Because how is it relevant? And I came up with this solution. It's based on crowdsourcing, for example. So there's a scale. There's like a broadband benefit for for a lot of people directly visible. And if you talk about the high-tech solutions, let's think about just my last example is this kind of building damage detection from satellite images. So this has been done in the past and it's possible because if you have like high resolution images of a disaster struck region, we can use machine learning and we can detect the damages directly. So we can send emergency troops into this area. But we need partnerships to leverage this data. These satellite images are expensive and are privately owned. There's no public data on this. So we need a system to enable us to get this data timely, and then we need to implement a system to automatically detect this information. So first we need the data, and then we can do the task. But before we don't have it, and we need some partnerships to do so. This is my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And I see that we have hands up from Rebecca and from Hush. Why don't we start with Rebecca? Miss Rebecca Bulgari, can you please unmute yourself? And by all means, we'd love to hear from you. If you don't mind just saying the member network country that you are from.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming through.
Thank you. So Rebecca Bulgari from the Vanuatu Business Resilience Council. I just wanted to share our experience with the blockchain technology. So we've done a successful program in partnership with Oxfam, just using the technology to reach out to affected populations in disaster areas affected by volcanic ash fall, the cyclone, and then COVID-19 as well. One of the things that we've realized is that the level of digital maturity here in Vanuatu is quite low at the moment. And so we really appreciate the funding that we received from CBI that has enabled us to undertake research to explore how the legal frameworks in Vanuatu need to be revised and updated to be able to allow for blockchain technology to be used more in the humanitarian field, but also across the private sector in other areas as well. And we've also just received funding to use GIS technology to help us improve our awareness of disaster risks, but also improve preparedness and private sector capacity to withstand and respond to potential major disasters in Vanuatu. So these are the two technologies that we're using at the moment, and we're looking forward to share our experiences with you guys. GIS, that one's very new, so we'll be talking more about that in the future.
Rebecca, thank you for that very thoughtful intervention, and it's really useful to sort of bring us back to earth and to remember that the technology is only as good as the context that it's being used in. So these are really good points and definitely to be taken into consideration. I know that the colleagues from the SUGAI lab will have some thoughts as well that they want to share. But just to make sure that we also have a chance to hear from Hush, whose hand is also up. Hush, can I ask you for your comment as well? And you very kindly put into your name here, so you're with APAD in Sri Lanka. Hush, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Karim, and nice to see you after a long time. And welcome, and glad that you are in the team. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think in general we are very happy about this initiative, and this is the way forward. And even if we are slow in our parts of the region to accept and to see also how technology could be used, I think we need to be there where we have the technology and the capacity to maximize the technology that we already have within the private sector. I think that is key. But coming back to the practical issues that we would have, but which we need to overcome, one of the issues that we have, Karim, and also the presentation team, is that when it comes to technology, it is very important that you have a very strong link with the government, because there are a lot of restrictions in terms of where you fly the drone and ensuring that the data is right and put together, and how there can be legitimacy in terms of the usage of this data. One is, okay, data collation, but with the use of technology, what we are all seeking for is speed, saving more lives, and also to ensure that there's no duplicity, and also to see how best we can optimize the resources in ensuring that you overcome immediately what you are, that is emergency response, and how you can ensure that there is recovery as well. So here, what we look forward to is how can we link very strongly with the government? How can there be authorities? Let me give you an example. One of the issues that we had with landslides was working with the service providers, the telephone mobile operators. We spoke to them and said, look, we need to identify the people who have gone missing. So they said there's a way to do that. We can ring their phones, and search and rescue guys can see whether the people are around, and basically go towards those phones which are ringing. But this has to be done fast. One is the battery life, as well as the authority. So what we came across here was the authority which we needed through the government telecommunication regulatory commission, where the service providers would need the authority from the government to use that facility. So the CBI in Sri Lanka, what we did was we brought all the the service providers together with the government, and now it's a matter of a call that they need to provide to the TRC and then get it going. But I think the same thing would apply to the other countries as well. So the linkage of the government in this process will be key. Second thing is, how can you utilize this information? Now, again, you would have this issue like in the other countries, internet penetration. What is the penetration that you have in your country? How many people have access to that? How many people have access to smartphones? So again, you need to overcome that. How you can overcome is how can this information be translated, utilized, and sent to somebody who can send it out fast. So there again, the partnership with media. So that is another key. How you can make use of the media to ensure that they send it out through their radios, their televisions, and so on. So I'm very glad that Karim and the team that you have put this together, which also loves us to go a little bit further and see how best we can reach out to the people. But if as CBI networks, if we can overcome those issues and also push for this technology, there would be a lot of barriers. But if we can show that we have this, how best we can utilize this through partnership, that is private sector as well as the government, and ensure that we save lives and so on. So I think this is a very good initiative. So if you guys can also give us some information of example, GIS and so on, the government also has it. They do the mapping, they do all that, but how is it translated and how fast does the information comes to us? Now, one of the examples, again, Karim, what I'm telling about is our networks again. The 13 or 12 networks that we have, CBI networks. If something happens in Philippines or in any other country, whether it is in Sri Lanka, how do we network among us to know what is happening in each of our countries? How fast can the information flow to us? We are always being informed through the media. We should be faster than the media. So I think that is what we need to, and I'm glad that we had this, and I'm sure we can be faster than the media through this. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Hush, for those really, really thoughtful comments. And I think, I'll just quickly say, like, the point that you really underscored about the importance of the government and the power of public-private partnerships, we couldn't possibly agree more. I also think, and we are thinking as the CBI Secretariat about how we can improve the communication among our networks and that flow of information and that exchange between us. So really excellent points all around, and thank you so much for that. There is a third question that's been entered into the chat here, and I'm going to read it in just a moment, and then I'm going to ask their colleagues from the SDG AI Lab to respond to all three of your points together. But before I do that, Nara, if you could please move us to the next slide. We'll just do one last Mentimeter exercise before we wrap up for the day. So again, if you can go to menti.com and enter in that code that you see there, 301-92568. We have one last question for everybody who is still in the room with us today. Thank you so much. And that question is, are you interested in piloting projects with CBI? So if you are interested in piloting some projects with us on new technologies and innovations, please do specify which use cases or technologies you're most interested in, and perhaps you can put your country in parentheses or in the response as well, just so that we have it recorded here. So while you are responding to this question, let me now turn to our colleagues from the SDGI Lab. You have heard really thoughtful remarks already from two of our colleagues, and the third colleague, Tawfiq, has shared with us in the chat a link to a private sector contributions dashboard that he's built in Indonesia, and he's asking if you think some of those tools you've mentioned could be helpful there. So I will leave it to the SDG AI Lab colleagues for your final thoughts in response to these comments, and then we'll see what responses we get from the Mentimeter exercise. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Karim. I think I can take the question from Tawfiq in the chat. It's a very good question, and I think I'm able to answer it because I'm working on exactly those things since 2-3 years now. So first of all, I was looking at the dashboard and it looks really great. So congratulations for establishing this project. Really, really good job. And regarding the data processing, especially when it comes for natural language processing, I would say it really depends what you're working with, right? So for example, if you want to access, as you say, more private sector related content and you want to process this data, we need to think, okay, how can we find this? Is this available online? So maybe we can build something like web scraping algorithms, which sounds a little bit complicated, but in the end, it's actually not too difficult to do so. So for example, we built an algorithm that automatically opens the relevant websites, downloads the documents, extracts the text, and puts it in your dashboard and extracts the information. This is like really, really one-to-one practice for NLP and not too difficult to do so. if the information is not maybe on websites and you have to extract the information from real PDF documents or something, then we have tools like optical character recognition, OCR, to process documents. It's basically image recognition, processing a scan and then extracting the text. And then the next point, I think that's the most important one, is how to find the relevant information in private sector documents. I think also can maybe add a little bit on this. So it depends if you want to look for metadata. So for example, you're just looking for the year of the document, the sector, or the company name. So this is something that is easily found because it's associated with the document, of course. But if you really want to look for specific information within the text and you want to extract those information, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And this is kind of the, I would say, most relevant research topic in NLP as well, how to identify relevant context and how can we contextualize text. But there are existing tools that can help you. I think maybe it's a bit too technical, but I'm very sure that we can support you in this. I'm very confident at least to do so. So maybe we can have like a follow-up discussion, just you and me or the team with you. Okay, and over to my team for more points and reflection.
Maybe I can make some minor additions, and also in relation to your last question. Some of this data, especially the critical data from the Statistical Institute and other relevant government institutions like Institute of Meteorology, can be acquired through technologies like APIs, or you can also have a conversation with these institutions to have their data distributed in a more machine-friendly way. If you can ensure a dialogue between your statistical institutes and other institutes to distribute the data in a machine-readable way, then your programs, your algorithms can easily access to their websites, locate the information and extract it without going into some complex algorithms. And this will ensure the accuracy of the data, because what they need to do on their website is, with a hidden, let's say, marker, they will say that this is the data for today's meteorological events. And your program algorithm will go and find that hidden marker, or the text marked with that hidden marker, and then extract it. And this can be done easily with having some conversation with the government authorities and increasing their awareness about the need for machine-readable data, providing machine-readable data. And nowadays, more and more governments are actually distributing their data through APIs. And it is really easy to get data through API, and it is also very accurate. Thank you.
Thank you, Gökhan and Jonas. I want to give Martin and Ken a chance to weigh in with any final thoughts as well. But in the meantime, I do want to thank all of the participants who've answered this prompt so far. We're logging all of this, of course, and we're going to be following up with each one of you. So thank you so much for your ideas and your participation. Nara, can we go to the next slide, please? Just a very quick one to wrap up here. So at the end of this quarter, we hope, by the start of the fall, to have the integrated insights and experiences of participants into a final research report. So there will be outreach from the SDG AI Lab team. We will be reaching out to each of you for additional feedback. And if you have any ideas, comments, suggestions, we'd very much welcome that as well. And you know how to reach us. We can pass your messages along to them. Also, we'll be conducting bilateral conversations with interested member networks for pilot projects, which we hope to start at the end of this year and into next year. And so we'll be thinking about what those pilot projects may be and what technologies can be applied where and which member networks. So very much looking forward to that. Next slide, please, Nara. And I just want to quickly say thank you again to the SDG AI Lab team, to the UNDP Istanbul International Center for Private Sector Development, and of course, all of you for joining us from everywhere that you are in the world. We really appreciate your inputs, and we look forward to continuing this conversation in the coming days and weeks. So thank you very much again and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you very much, everyone. Very nice talking to you.
Thank you so much. It was a good discussion.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks.